You're with Steve Austin
Streaming live on the ABC Listen app
on 6:12 a.m.
and on your smart speaker.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane.
You would have heard on ABC Radio News today, the federal government says its signature Housing Australia Future Fund has delivered 340 new homes. And they're building more. 5,000 apparently are starting construction. Amanda Rishworth is the Federal Minister for Social Services. She says they think they can meet their goal of building 30,000 new homes over the next 5 years. If you had seen Alan Kohler on the weekend, you would have seen the data that shows they're not on track. In fact, we're slowing down the building of homes. So let's go to my next guest who says, well, there needs to be a whole raft of things brought into play to improve our ability to build homes so that a young person or a young couple can buy a house. John Abernethy is founder and chairman of Clime Investment Management Limited. He recently wrote a piece that laid out a range of ways he thought we could fix this. John, first of all, the federal government's current housing strategy is called the Housing Australia Future Fund, which uses share market returns to fund the building of homes. Today they say 340 have been built with 5,000 under construction. What do you think of the federal government's current system or plan, John?
Well, it's too slow. I mean, I don't want to say it's ridiculous, but it sounds ridiculous. We've got, I think the estimate's about 15 or 16% of the population's below the poverty line. You know, they're obviously going to be struggling to own a house. So we could talk about 1.5 million people, including children. So when you start talking 300 houses, when so many people are below the poverty line and clearly can't afford to live in a house, let alone pay the rent, you really are, I don't think you're even scratching the surface. So it's a bit of an embarrassment. And they're only utilising the proceeds of investments rather than using the capital. And in Australia today, we've got abundant capital. I don't know whether you picked up overnight the Australian Treasurer in America, and he made the comment that we have $4 trillion in super. We have $400 billion invested in the American economy. In 10 years' time, we'll have $10 trillion of super and $1 trillion invested in America. You know, we have immense amounts of capital sitting in superannuation and in government funds to really get on the front foot and build and meet the demand.
Give me your take, John Abernethy, on what's driving such a high demand for housing currently.
Well, underbuilding. In the last 12 months, we built the same number of houses we built in 2008, which is pretty embarrassing. So after 17 years, we've still got the same. And unless I missed something, the population has grown by about 4 or 5 million over that period. In the last 3 years, we've immigrated 1 million people, and those people rightfully want to be housed. They don't come here and live in the desert. They come into the cities and want to have a house. They rent, and then they'll look for somewhere to live. They want to have a family, as do current Australians. So the demand, when you have that million people is added to the population by 4%, right? And if you assume that they've got, if you're very conservative, you say that's 200,000 families, you know. So there's over 1 year demand in just through immigration, let alone what's going on in the economy as is. So we're way behind on supply, and we pump prime demand through immigration without any thought process about getting the infrastructure and the housing in place before we invite these people to come here.
Well, let me jump on that, because I've done endless stories on housing now, John. I'm almost sick of doing them because I keep hearing this, but there seems to be this massive reluctance in the federal government to acknowledge the issue of the pressure that immigration has brought, which seems to be shutting out couples that A, want to get married, or B, might be married together, living together, what have you, and want to buy a house. Why is the federal government, who controls immigration, refusing to acknowledge this element?
Well, they don't even acknowledge that we have a housing bubble. So there's two aspects. We've got housing demand exceeding supply, and we've got a shortage of housing. We've also got unaffordability. They don't want to take any responsibility for any of those positions, okay? So if they said we're immigrating too many people, they're admitting that they haven't got infrastructure and housing in place. That's why they won't take responsibility, because they'd have to admit they're wrong. And in my thought piece, which you've referred to, I said right up front, to get over the top of this housing problem, there has to be admission that we've got it wrong for 25 years. And that means governments, parliamentarians, bureaucrats, and the Reserve Bank in particular have to put it down and say, look, we got it wrong. Because you're never going to fix it unless you realise and acknowledge you've got it wrong, and be honest with the public. Because the way to bring down, to make property more affordable, there's only two ways it can happen. Either, and if we measure affordability by the multiple of the average price of housing to the average income, the only way you can make those two, income and the cost of housing, come together is either reduce the price of housing, and that's painful for those who own it, or substantially increase the average income, and that creates massive inflation through the economy. So there is no easy fix, and what the parliamentarians do, they don't want to admit they stuffed it, and they don't want to come clean and say to the people, look, the fix is actually quite painful and it's going to need a decade. And the longer we delay in getting going, to have the discussion, to have what I call a national inquiry, free of politicians, free of bureaucrats, where actually business leaders who actually understand the market, the housing market, formulate a policy, and it doesn't become a political football. Both sides, the parliament buys into it. That's our plan. That's where we want to be. And let's check in every year how we're going to the plan to make housing more affordable and get supply up to meet the demand which we created through immigration.
We're a democracy, John Abernethy. We say to our politicians, this problem has arisen. What are you going to do about it? And so they come up with ideas like the Housing Australia Future Fund, which was opposed. I mean, to the Greens opposed the fund very strongly to their political costs somewhat. But then they also proposed exactly the opposite of what you're suggesting somewhat, saying just get public money and build housing, like a sort of a housing department. Just start building cheap housing for people using taxpayer money or capital up front.
Yeah, well, it probably needs more than just doing that. It actually needs planning cities, it needs planning, townships. It's a big issue, and you're right, we are a democracy and we rely heavily on our government, our politicians and our bureaucracy to be on the front foot. What we have is only a discussion on these issues, apart from the Greens, I don't want to go there, but the major parties only get on the front foot and discuss it 2 months out from an election. For the rest of the time, they're numb. This is a major issue. You look at all the diatribe that goes down in Parliament. I don't want to sound like Jackie Lambie, but you look at all the diatribe in question time, and serious questions about the cost of living, the standard of living, the cost of housing in this country are not touched upon and debated, right? So, but 2 months before an election, amazing what pops out. What were these guys doing? I'm talking both sides of Parliament. What were you doing for the last 3 years? Indeed, the last 10, the last 25 years. Okay? They are seriously responsible for the mess we're in, and they have to fix it. And I don't think they've got the capacity intellectually to fix it. They actually need help from outside Parliament and outside the bureaucracy. Can
I just clarify? So you agree, because people sometimes are reluctant to say this, but we have a housing bubble at the moment, a price bubble, that if you're buying a house now, you're paying massively overpriced over the value of the place you're buying.
Well, based on history, like 25 years ago, the average house price to the average income was 9 times. We're sitting at over 16 times. And if people can just conceptualise this, it's what's happened in the stock market. It's like a company earns the same amount of money, and 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was trading at 9 times earnings, and now it's trading at 16, 17 times earnings. And you think, that's strange, I'm not earning any more money, but the stock price has gone up. In this case, people, yes, everyone's earning more money than they did 20 years ago, but the stock price, the price of property has gone up 60, 70% more than income, okay? Now, that has been facilitated by debt. There is a clear nexus between the amount of debt in the household sector and the price of housing and the multiple converted from price to income. There's a clear nexus. So what has happened over decades has been very lax regulation of credit, reduction in deposits, and the banks have had a field day, and they've actually been directed to do this through a whole lot of international regulations regarding capital. They've been told, don't lend to businesses, don't lend against cash flow, lend to property. It's your lowest risk asset. So there's a whole lot of reasons why this bubble has appeared, and Australia has meekly sat back, our regulators, and we all got a warning shot in 2008 when the GFC, which doesn't seem to have been registered in Australia. We were very lucky to not be sucked into that. We got through it. But what did we learn from it? The first thing you would have learned from it is we better watch the housing market, otherwise we can create a financial problem for ourselves. Now, we're not there yet, but by God, we're a long way down the track, and we have to rectify it.
My guest is John Abernethy, founder and chairman of Clime Investment Management. This is 612 ABC Brisbane. Steve Austin's my name. So on the housing bubble, the federal government has made it quite clear that they want this situation to stay the same.
Yeah.
I want to play, so this is Claire O'Neill, the federal housing minister. Late last year, she was interviewed on the ABC's youth network, Triple J. Just have a listen to this. You'll hear the question and Claire O'Neill's answer. I'll get your response.
What is the goal here in terms of these policies? Is it to bring down house prices? Is that what the government wants to do?
We want to bring house price growth into something sustainable. So we're not trying to bring down house prices, but we don't want to see some of the growth that we've seen in some parts of the country where you're getting double-digit increases in house prices year on year.
Why don't you want to be seeing house prices drop? Because if you're looking to get into the market, if you're a young person looking at what's ahead of you, you definitely want to see house prices come down.
Well, that may be the view of young people. It's not the view of our government. We want to see sustainable price growth. We want to see more houses come online. We want to see that rental vacancy rate go up a bit because that will relieve pressure on renters. And we certainly want to see more homeowners. And the government has taken action on all of those pieces this week.
Minister, if house prices don't come down, doesn't that mean that this system is stacked against young people, that it's just not going to work for them?
Sure. And Dave, we may have a difference of view about this. I have a strong view. Our government's policies are not going to reduce house prices. We want house prices to grow sustainably.
Housing Minister Claire O'Neill. They don't want house prices to come down, John Abernethy.
Well, the key word sustainable, which wasn't defined in the answer. The sustainable means that house prices go up at a slower rate than wages. So if you've got wages going up at 4%, you probably need house prices to go sideways for 5 years and then maybe trickle up 1 or 2% per annum. And you might get some correction in the multiple, which is 16, 17 times. You might bring it back to 13, 14 or 12. It's a slow burn. If that's the strategy, sustain house prices, I agree with her. You can't sustain 10%, but they've done it. They supported it. There's a whole lot of taxation policies which support price rises. We've created, a strange negative gearing system, which allows offsets against all income, not against the income of the asset you've bought. That doesn't help. Tax-free capital gains. We penalise people who want to change their house into their household into, they want to share it with someone else. Once you do that, you break the nexus, you lose your tax-free status. So there's a whole lot of things which sustain price and push price up. And I guess the government, and the figures are clear. Home ownership, 65% of people living in homes own them, right? The majority of people own their own home. When you think about votes, therefore, you're going after the majority of people and say, we want to hold your price up and push it up to get their vote. It's as simple as that. The people who haven't got a house, at this stage, they haven't got enough votes to stir the government or the opposition into looking after them. And that's the young people. Now, we're probably going to get a shock in the next election, and I'm not going to be a pundit and tell you, but I think I've heard numbers, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, young people, who couldn't vote in the last election or vote in this election. That's how fast the economy is transforming in terms of its demographics. And let's see what these people say at the voting box. I don't think they're going to be impressed with either party, and that has consequences over the next parliament, how it's brought together and who controls it. And I think the older people might not like the result of that.
If you can't buy into the housing market, you don't have a stake in the future of the country, and you'll act accordingly.
You'll protest. And the only way we can protest, and the only way we want to protest in this country, is through the ballot box. And what the major parties are doing is, and you can see it over 20, 30 years, the drift away from the major parties. It's massive over my lifetime. I think 80-odd% of people used to vote Labor or Liberal when I was coming out of high school. Today, it's less than 70, and we're creating this disenchanted vote, which is going to go somewhere, okay? And we're seeing it all around the Western world, Steve. It's all around the world. We're seeing it in Germany, and I saw it in America. You've seen it in France. It's all around the world. There's protest votes coming everywhere, and the incumbents just don't get it.
I'll leave it there, John. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
John Abernethy, founder and chairman of Clime Investment Management.